A diver stumbles upon a mysterious building hidden beneath the sea, fully intact, with a sealed hatch buried in the floor. What he finds inside leads to a forgotten government-backed experiment and a discovery that was never meant to be found. But what was it really for? You'll want to stay until the end. But before we start our story, smash the like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Ben Keller had always found calm in the water. It was the one place where everything slowed down: his thoughts, his breathing, even time itself. After years of diving along the Adriatic coast, he had seen shipwrecks, coral forests, and rusted anchors. But he wasn't a treasure hunter. He dove because the silence of the sea made sense to him. That September, Ben planned a solo dive just off the coast of Puglia, where he'd heard vague talk of a strange structure lying beneath the surface. A retired fisherman at the marina had mentioned it, saying, "It looked like part of a house, but who builds a house under the sea?" Most people laughed it off. Ben didn't. Equipped with his usual gear and an underwater camera, Ben launched his small boat from a quiet cove. The weather was perfect: calm seas, bright sun, and good visibility forecasted. He dropped anchor a few hundred meters offshore and took a slow breath before descending. The first few meters were the usual blur of fish and flickering light. At around 20 meters down, the water cleared. That's when he saw it. Not a shipwreck or reef, but something rectangular jutting from the seabed. He swam closer, heart quickening. What he found startled him: an actual stone wall. Smooth, man-carved, and connected to other walls, forming a corner. It wasn't nature. It was architecture. The stone had an olive gray hue, overgrown in places with algae and barnacles. As he traced its outline, Ben noticed an arched doorway, its top half still intact. He hovered there, staring into the opening, half expecting some creature to emerge. But it was quiet. The current shifted gently. The place felt still. He surfaced after 40 minutes, pulled off his mask, and sat back on the boat, staring out at the waves. This wasn't something ordinary. He had found a submerged building, maybe more. And it didn't look ancient. It wasn't in ruins. That puzzled him most. Why would a solid building be lying quietly underwater just offshore? Ben returned the next morning, better prepared. This time, he brought a sonar scanner and markers to map out the dimensions. Over several dives, he pieced together the structure's outline. It wasn't huge, roughly the size of a small cottage, but its proportions were unmistakably deliberate. Rectangular base, internal walls, stair-like formations inside. The building was largely intact. The roof was missing, or perhaps it never had one. There were no artifacts, no signs of habitation like tools or ceramics. But there was detail. Etched lines on the interior walls, narrow ledges, a sunken floor space that might have once held furniture or equipment. It didn't match any underwater ruins he'd ever heard of. He sent photos to a local dive historian he knew in Bari. She was intrigued, but couldn't identify it. "It's not Roman, not Byzantine. Nothing in that area should look like that," she wrote. The curiosity deepened. Was it a private project? Some kind of modern experiment? Ben wasn't convinced. He continued diving the site over the following days, documenting everything. The walls, the angles, the interior layout. He didn't tell many people. Not yet. He wanted to understand it first. One morning, he noticed a rectangular plate embedded in the floor, barely visible beneath a thin layer of sand. It looked like a hatch. Carefully, Ben cleared it off. The plate was metal, corroded but still solid. He could just make out a set of small indentations, finger grips. He tried lifting it, but it was sealed tight, unmoved for years. He left it undisturbed, choosing instead to log it and come back later with better tools. But that night, his mind raced with possibilities. He called his friend Luca, an engineer and part-time diver, who agreed to help. The two of them returned 2 days later with a pry bar and underwater epoxy saws. It took effort, but eventually, the hatch gave way with a muffled groan. Beneath it was a hollow chamber and, astonishingly, a box. The container was metal, rectangular, and sealed, but not locked. They brought it to the surface carefully, avoiding damage. On the boat, after drying it off, Ben opened the latch. Inside were papers, waterproof sleeves, carefully arranged. Some had handwritten labels. Others looked like engineering diagrams. One read, Project Vitrum Phase 2. Report 1972. Ben stared. 1972? That wasn't ancient history. That was modern. The pages included notes, sketches, measurements on an entire binder of technical detail. One paper bore a faded stamp from a research institute in Milan. This wasn't some rogue build. It had been funded, legitimate, planned. As Ben read through the materials that evening, a story began to take shape. Project Vitrum had been a collaboration between Italian marine researchers and experimental architects. The idea was to explore underwater habitation not as a survival strategy, but as a form of therapy, a study in silence, pressure, and isolation for mental health purposes. The building had been a prototype, a test chamber for short-term human occupancy beneath the sea. Volunteers would spend hours, sometimes overnight, within the structure, documenting their emotional states and reactions. The project had lasted only 2 years before funding was pulled, leaving the facility sealed and abandoned. The team had assumed the sea would reclaim it. Ben was stunned. He had found not a ruin, but a forgotten experimenta scientific relic. It explained the structure's integrity, the lack of traditional artifacts, the strange hatch. Everything made sense now. The building wasn't meant to be lived in, but experienced. Quietly, briefly, he contacted the now-retired institute. They confirmed the project's existence. That building was one of the earliest underwater psychological labs in Europe. A former researcher emailed him. We never thought anyone would find it again. They offered to send archival photos and details. Ben asked if he could visit some of the people who had worked on it. 2 weeks later, he sat across from Professor Livia Mancini in a modest apartment in Genoa. She had been 29 at the time of the experiment, working as a field psychologist. Her eyes lit up when Ben showed her the photographs. "I can't believe it's still there," she said, voice trembling. "We called it the House of Stillness." She spoke fondly of those months of lowering into the structure, of the unnatural calm it induced. "It was like being inside a breath that never ends," she said. "We found that even short exposure reduced anxiety and stress in every volunteer. But in the 70s, funding something invisible was hard. The ministry wanted results, not feelings." She hesitated, then opened an old folder. Inside were grainy photos, a young man sitting cross-legged inside the chamber. Scribbled notes on his reactions. Among the papers was a short handwritten essay written by one of the last test subjects before the project ended. Livia smiled gently. "That was me. I tried to stay impartial, but on my last visit I sat inside for an hour. It changed something in me. The world was loud again when I came up. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore." Ben nodded, the weight of it all settling in. The building wasn't forgotten because it failed. It was forgotten because it succeeded quietly, too quietly for the world to notice. He returned to the dive site days later with fresh eyes. The structure, now mapped and cataloged, had been given temporary cultural protection. Plans were underway to preserve it, not as a tourist site, but as a study case in humane architecture, a story of calm beneath chaos. Ben dove once more, alone. He drifted through the doorway, touched the stone, and sat on the floor where Livia once had. The sea moved around him, slow and constant. For a while, he thought of nothing, then of everything. The world above, the people he missed, the man he had once been. And slowly, his chest lightened. The sea had listened. And that building, strange and small, had kept a secret until someone was ready to understand it.